In preparing for this this talk tonight, it's you never know how detailed and how how in depth you want to get. I've spent the day with undergrads, master's students, PhD students throughout this campus, and I'm pleased to say, even from my other exposures and being reinforced today, this is a great place. There's neat things going on in Nebraska. There's really neat things going on East Campus. I've got a prepared text and I'm going to get through it, but before I do, my family is a little tired of listening to me ramble on this subject, but I'm blown away with what's going on here. I've got, I'll talk about it later, 16 PhDs work for me. I've got an attorney on staff. I've got CPAs, master's students, Texas Tech, K-State. A lot of them came out of here. But Nebraska's reloading really well. I'll just leave it at that. Entrepreneurs don't generally talk about themselves or voluntarily give advice. Entrepreneurs that have their roots in Nebraska are probably even worse about talking about themselves. It's not in the culture. Nobody likes to brag about themselves, and it sometimes gets a little embarrassing even having some of this stuff said about you. People don't like to be, they like to be emulated but not copied. And a little bit, another aspect about entrepreneurs is, frankly, I think they have a tendency to guard what they know. That pretty well goes across the board. But having made the decision to do this, to the great surprise of my associates and friends and family, I really have a few things that I want to transmit to you. I am so impressed with the students' Engler program. I'm compelled to encourage and share some things I think you should know. I'm sure that Dr. Field has given you a definition of entrepreneurship. There's many of them out there. The one I like the best is from Howard Stevenson. He's an icon at Harvard Business School, which is a place I pay a lot of attention to, frankly, in business. Howard's definition is, entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources you currently control. The pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources you currently control. So if you believe that, and I do, an entrepreneur can work in corporate America. An entrepreneur can be a teacher. An entrepreneur doesn't have to be a guy or a gal starting their own business. Entrepreneurs are people who have the catalytic effect of mobilizing others around an idea. Let me begin by telling you a little bit about our companies in addition to what was mentioned earlier, because I'll refer back to some of this. But Dagger Holdings is based in Firestone. We're composed of several companies. We've either started organically from scratch or acquired as an undervalued resource that was about to go out of business somewhere, and we bought it and grew it and made it into a significant entity. The primary driver is a company that manufactures cattle supplements and occupies the nutrition and management consulting space in the feedlot industry. The company has 6 locations in Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, and Iowa. We work with farmer feeders and feedlots of over 100,000 head capacity and everything in between. We're generally recognized as a leader in the trade in terms of market share. Another company is a milling company in Scott City, Kansas. That company deals primarily in specialized niche products as opposed to the large volume wholesale approach we employ elsewhere. Another company is a trading and commodity company in Dodge and Dalhart, mentioned earlier. Large terminals. We operate a railroad fleet. They're also recognized as a market leader in fats and oils. Another company is a 50% partnership with Swift Foods that deals with their cattle feeding supplement operation and is located outside of Greeley. The primary owners of Swift is a Batista family in Sao Paulo, Brazil, who is, believe me, an entrepreneurial family. They have a presence of their own, in their own right. Another company, and one that I see as growing the most in the intermediate term, is an import company. It has barge and ship cargo capabilities, and we're in the process of expanding our coastal and river presence. All told, we have many employees in several states. It includes, I told several people today, 16 PhDs, several masters of animal science, a CPA, an MBA, and a lawyer. They just joined us for some new ventures we're looking into. Outside of the holding company, I'm involved in the cattle business. We feed about 124,000 cattle in western Nebraska and Colorado through Dinklage feed yards. With two other partners, I've got feed yards in Kansas, and Syracuse and Tribune. We started a bank holding company in the 80s and 90s. It's grown to an 8-bank holding company in western Nebraska. Little towns like Juanita and Ogallala, to Fort Collins and Loveland, Scottsbluff and Gearing. This is most of, but not all of what I'm involved in, but you won't find us on a website. I don't do Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, and that was an accident. So we don't do any kind of advertising. And that's why I went through all of this. I've always maintained that the only people we have to please or promote ourselves to are our customers and our clients. We are not marketers of soap or consumer goods, so we have that luxury. We generate our customers and clients from a strong service-based performance. I can't emphasize that enough. People who work with us depend on us and know us from the inside out. Focus and strong personal relationships are absolutely imperative in the value creation process, entrepreneurial or otherwise. In addition, another piece of advice I'll give you is to take full advantage at this stage in your life, because it all comes back, and take all the management, finance, accounting, and statistics classes you possibly can. I've further recently recommended to Paul and Dr. Field that the Engler program should include some business ethics and philosophy and logic. This background will create value. It'll make you better rounded. It'll help you avoid some of the problems you read about in your headlines every day. Judgment and character need a real shot in the arm in business and government. This brings me to another point about value creation. Constantly ask yourself, what really needs to be done? The second and equally important question, what no longer needs to be done, and should we cut it back or cut it out? Business, universities, and government rarely, if ever, go through this exercise. All organizations need to recognize the need for weight control and re-examination of purpose. Large organizations, when they're overstaffed, destroy motivation. They destroy accomplishment, achievement, and satisfaction. In the end, they destroy performance, excuse me, and value. About to lose my voice, I've been talking all day. I'll tell you this because in the value creation business, you're going to find out quickly that your best competition, thank you a lot, your best competition, or should I say your easiest competition, is many times large corporate competition. To explain this further, I'll go back to before my partners and I got in business together, which was in 1982. Prior to that, from 1971 to 1982, I worked for the Union Oil Company of California. Those 11 years after I left Lincoln were, frankly, the best graduate school or internship I could have had. I was in the chemical division of the company, and it was a very diverse incubator of talent. It was filled with engineers, agronomists, chemists, and as I explained, or as I call them, the roughneck explorers that worked all over the world. Within that division was a group of animal feed companies in the Imperial and San Joaquin valleys of California, the Columbia River Basin in Washington, the Snake River Basin in went through southern Idaho, and the South Platte in Colorado and the North Platte in western Nebraska. The man that ran that division became my mentor even before I knew what a mentor was. His name isn't important, but his name was Bill Van Lear, and he's a private entrepreneur that sold his business to Union and then stayed on to run a few things for a little while. It was apparent in a short period of time that he was some of the best talent they had. So it wasn't very long when he ran the place. He ran the whole group. And there's a lot of us young guys that learned a lot from him. Bill taught me how to think. He showed us how to decentralize and simplify. Business operations were simplified to the point that accounting and financial controls were the only things left to reside in Los Angeles, and everything else was directed what we call the simplest and most basic operating level. I learned that the simplest and most basic operating level is where you are when you're standing in front of a customer. Bill believed that those decisions should be made, more decisions should be made closest to the customer and not at the home office, many miles away. This concept has served me well in my early career, and it is something I've hammered into everyone around me after I went out on my own. Back then, our primary competitors were large and corporate, Cargill, Ralston Purina, and much of their bureaucracy is what I consider an unnecessary component. You see, one of the things I want you to take home tonight is the desirability and necessity of simplicity. This speaks to operations and, frankly, life in general. Simplify by zeroing in on the essence of a task or product and eliminate the unnecessary components. Later in the 80s and 90s, this tenacious mindset made us formidable competitors. It made our decisions and operations quicker and better. It made our products better. Our service was at the speed of light compared to our corporate competition. We created value in a commodity-based business, which, believe me, is hard to do. And our customers made us part of their management team as they relied on us for more products and services. This concept pertains to startups as well. In fact, to me, a useful way to analyze entry points in a market is to find products in the market that are made more complicated than they should be. If they had a sizable market share in spite of that, then they are ripe for disruption. And disruption and being a disruptor is what an entrepreneur is and does. It is how he or she creates value. Simplify the product and simplify the delivery process. That's what Steve Jobs did, and that's what Sam Walton did. They created value through cheaper and better products, and sometimes both. Entrepreneurs shift resources from areas of low productivity and yield to areas of high productivity and yield. Try to break the process down to its simplest form to find and create value where others don't. simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That's not an original thought. That's another Steve Jobsism. That was his theory, and it was defined by his products. Technical, complicated, sophisticated, yet elegant and simple to operate. Remember what I said earlier, simplify by zeroing in on the essence of a task or product and eliminate the unnecessary component. Really visualize what that means in some of your own ideas. Sadly, some of the unnecessary components are parts of a product or service, but it's almost always will include some people. During the 80s and 90s, our company created large market share in the cattle feeding areas between Texas and Nebraska. We were a major reason that the trade consolidated. We were the major reason, one of the major reasons that Ralston Purina went into bankruptcy, not once, but twice during that period, and was ultimately absorbed by a co-op. Sometimes it's hard to watch, but if you don't like this disruption process, don't be entrepreneurial and just go along with the way things have always been. As we created value and were recognized as better, we grew and everybody else shrank. They got smaller or they exited the business. An innovation, to be effective, has to be simple and it has to be focused. It should only do one thing, otherwise it confuses. If it is not simple, I promise you it won't work. All effective innovations are breathlessly simple, breathtakingly simple. Indeed, the greatest praise an innovation can receive is for people to say, "This is obvious. Why didn't I think of that?" Even the innovation that creates new uses and new products should be directed toward a specific, clear, and designed application. It should be focused on a specific need that it satisfies and a specific end that it produces. Innovation, effective innovation, starts small. That's how we all did it. They try to do one specific thing, but they aim at leadership. That is incredibly important. It is always difficult to predict whether an innovation or an idea will become a new business or a modest achievement. But if you don't aim at leadership from the beginning, it is unlikely to be innovative enough, and therefore unlikely to be capable of establishing itself. All strategies are for entrepreneurial growth of an idea or innovation must achieve leadership within a given environment in a relatively short period of time. That's incredibly important. Otherwise, they'll simply create an opportunity for the competition. Now, I learned that one in a bitter and well-publicized way. A group of us, another company that's not on that list earlier, was one that had a presence here in Lincoln and in Hastings. It was called Premium Protein Products. It was a startup in the prepared food space. I was a partner in it and I was on the board. We were rocking and rolling for a minute, but we basically failed in 3 years. It seemed like 30 years, but it was only 3. At our peak, we were processing 1,000 cattle a week. We had some innovative pre-cooked products. And we were gaining traction in sales at places like Panera Bread and the Texas Roadhouse. And I won't even begin to try to describe how ecstatic we were and excited when our first shipments of private label product arrived in Japan and Korea. However, Tom, you're going to love this. We could not achieve dominance or scale fast enough to keep other companies like Sara Lee from imitating the product at a lower price over a long enough period of time that you burn through your capitalization. We burned through more cash after several capital calls than I even want to tell you about. In addition, we gathered enough attention in the market that our competition hired away a few of our key people for more money than we were paying, which isn't saying a lot, because as a lot of you might know, startups, a really big day has been able to meet payroll. From this experience, we also learned not to diversify too soon. Early on, do not diversify. Don't try to do too many things at once. And this is obviously a corollary to what I said earlier. Be focused. Focus on a narrow product line and make them the best. Innovations that stay within their core are likely, innovations that stray, from their core are likely to become diffuse. There has to be a core of unity to innovative efforts, or they will likely fall apart, sometimes fly apart. An innovation needs the concentrated energy of a united effort behind it. It also requires that people who put it into effect understand each other. And this too requires a unity of core, common core. This too is imperiled by diversity and splintering. When Steve Jobs was brought back to Apple to save Apple, the first thing he did was gather the operational, design, and technical executives and had them list on a whiteboard all the real products in the pipeline they were working on. They came up with 20. He got out of his chair and he took the marker and he circled the top 3 and said that that's all they could afford to focus on. He understood the core. He understood the limited amount of time you have to deliver before you're copied or swallowed up by a competitor. You must be focused, you must be tenacious, and you must keep it simple. That was the real concern at the time. Apple was on the verge of failing. That was in 1995, after he had been ousted from the company in 1985. The rest of the Apple story, as they say, is history. But that's how it started to come back. That's a very common story. Another thing I want you to know, or at least question, is to not get too wrapped up in market research. And the marketing faculty won't like to hear that, but they'll get it as I go on, I think. That sounds counterintuitive when entrepreneurs are already taking huge risks, and it would seem like you should at least know what the market wants. I had to relearn this aspect of business. The truth is, customers don't know what they want. Stated again with an important corollary, customers don't know what they want, but they know what they like when they see it. This is not an original thought, and it probably goes past Henry Ford, but he was the most notable. He gets the most credit for the following when asked about market research and knowing what customers want. He said, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Customers don't know what they want, but they know what they like when they see it. People didn't know they needed an iPod. They were pretty happy with a boombox and Sony Walkman. Why should I use a tablet when my computer works perfectly well? After I saw it, I realized I liked it and it fit certain applications that I did better than my laptop. So don't overanalyze consumer and customer wants when you're trying to get started. Have a good idea and convince them, particularly in consumer goods. That's a very fleeting and fickle exercise with consumer goods. The best use of your time is to analyze and measure the velocity of change. Change is something you can count on in this high-tech world and economy. And if you understand the economy and your place in it, you can position yourself in front of the next best thing, in front of what's going to happen next. Another mentor I had early on said it this way: think beyond what other people know. Anticipate change and get in front of it. Let me talk about failure, fear of failure. It's another take-home I want you to have. I've got a lot of experience. No discussion about entrepreneurialism would be complete without it, without talking about failure. Even as I regret and still have some embarrassment about the failure of our food processing company efforts, I believe that we should allow people to fail. Entrepreneurs are creative people. Creative people disrupt the status quo and experience some failure. You can't encourage creativity and not tolerate failure. You and those who work with you need idea space. And in that, Tom, it really warmed my heart when I saw Moneyball on your reading list. I read it when it first came out in 2003. It's a great sports book, but it's a great business book. And the same guy that wrote it, Michael Lewis, wrote Liar's Poker and The Big Short. They're even better. But let's look at baseball. The difference between a 300 hitter and a 250 hitter is about 1 hit a week. I did the math, it's right. 1 hit a week. That's all it takes. If you win 60% of your games in baseball, you'll make the playoffs and probably be in the World Series. In any industry's research department, the difference between being very successful and failing is maybe 1 hit a year or 1 hit a career. Alexander Fleming is a great example. Fleming discovered penicillin. He did it when he noticed that a culture he was growing did not survive in some mold that he had accidentally contaminated a specimen. But he had the innovative spirit to perceive the significance of that and the implication of it, whereas some people might have washed the slide and started over. That was the only discovery of his career. You should not focus on your failures. You should learn from them and focus on your strengths. As I have analyzed where we went wrong in the food processing business, would I try it again under the right circumstances with a drop of a hat? The most certain thing in entrepreneurship is failure. But winners pivot off of that failure and move towards success. Just come back, go in another direction. Failure is not an end, it's a turning point. It's a pivot point on the road to success. Successful people focus on their strengths and try to build on things that they're already good at. Try to be great at what you're already good at. And frankly, and I'm very sincere about this, I believe this is why the Engler program is going to be very successful in the future. It's apparent to me that unlike a lot of academic classes and things that go on in school, nobody's being force-fed anything to anybody here. It's allowing students to be immersed in things they're already good at or are leaning towards that. That's a big deal. It's allowing them to be immersed in their passion, Paul. There's an engagement and enthusiasm in this group that I find very encouraging. As you become successful in your business and even within a larger organization, you're going to find that your role changes somewhat if you become more than a startup. And I strongly recommend that you become familiar with what Michael Porter at Harvard Business School calls sustainable competitive advantage. It's incredibly important. Understanding this concept is good for business, and frankly, it's good for football coaches. Understanding this concept of sustainable competitive advantage, you'll come to realize that it is an acknowledgement of the onslaught from competitors, from developing competitors because you've made it look too easy, the rise of substitutes to replace what you're doing or your product, the bargaining power of suppliers, which cuts into your margin, the bargaining power of vendors, which does the same and also tends to make your product into a commodity. The obvious defense against all of this is to be highly efficient and become a low-cost producer. But more important than that is, one, brand equity. There's a hesitancy about new products from new companies. Brand equity helps companies pass that hesitancy. Two is partnership relationships. Partner relations with both vendors and customers implies trust, that you're in this together and you look out for each other. Three, national and sometimes global infrastructure. All products require infrastructure to establish footholds and distribute quickly. Four is technical knowledge. Specialized people on your team can produce some difficult to replicate knowledge that is often patentable. If it's not patentable, then five, which is frankly my favorite, process excellence. Make your operations, production, distribution, whatever you're doing, run so smoothly that a competitor gets tired of finding a weakness. I hope I've given you some take-home points tonight that stay with you for a while. I remember being your age, so I know that's a challenge. There are many other things that I could have covered, but I know from your backgrounds you already accept the necessity of hard work and sacrifice. I think it's important that I close my remarks this way. Our country, the greatest and most productive nation on earth, the nation that has driven growth on the planet since the nation's inception, is at a crossroads. Never before in our history, I think, are entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial spirit more important. Growth driven by government is a very short-term fix, and rarely is it a fix at all. It only temporarily stops a decline long enough for the private sector to start moving again. Earlier I spoke about disruption and creative destruction. These concepts don't play well politically, but they are necessary for growth and renewal. You can never fix sluggish national and international economies over the long term by throwing money, taxpayer money, at it. This policy only preserves the inefficient and lengthens or delays the inevitable outcome. Creative destruction shortens the process and lets the most efficient thinkers in management and labor thrive and move ahead. These concepts are not popular to say, but they are the truth. I am always amazed to discover that people don't understand that all resources are finite. Our business demonstrates the point from our very beginning. In 1967, I'll demonstrate it this way. When I got out of high school, so you can figure out how old I am, we produced as a nation, Paul, 25 billion pounds of beef to the consumer. Today, we might produce a little more, maybe 27 billion pounds. What does that say? Well, it obviously says we're not a growth industry. The important number to know, though, is that we did that with 25 million fewer cattle. This speaks volumes to science, technology, innovation, and efficiency. We're producing close to the same amount of beef with significantly fewer cattle. Now, I'll remind you, during that same period of time, our company doubled in size more than once in that same time. For us to grow, because we thought we were smarter and more efficient, we were, in effect, running others out of business because the pie didn't get bigger. In other words, people were losing their jobs. You'll find scenarios like this in other parts of the economy, and as an entrepreneur, you need to learn how to deal with that. Agriculture will generally follow suit. The example I just described with cattle is we've got a growing population, millions of people entering the middle class every year, particularly in Asia. But our productive land mass is shrinking and at best staying static. Therefore, the most efficient will grow in that same size pie to serve all of those people. The pie won't get bigger. Resources are finite. Entrepreneurs will drive this process, and they'll create value through efficiency and technology. And the displaced will find a home in other industries or retrain for the next wave. Entrepreneurs will drive the process, not government, because government lacks courage, and the right people cannot get elected by telling the truth, sadly. If you tell the truth, huge voting blocks run the other way. None of this is new, but for some reason each generation has to relearn the lesson. I want to thank you for your time and attention. To deliver the first Engler lecture is, I consider, an honor. I've admired Paul, excuse me, I've admired Paul forever. He's worthy of emulation in business, believe me. This has made possible a great program, great program. And Tom, you're obviously inspiring these students to think. And I want to encourage you to do that, make them think, and more important, make them fearless. I don't want to overstate the case or be melodramatic, but I'm telling you, you've got to be fearless. Get started. I predict great things for this program, and it's going to be fun to watch it in the future. Thanks.